Hello, and welcome everyone to the first webinar of the year. And hello, especially to Bart and Micha, who both agreed to do the first webinar with us. And they're both Agile TD ambassadors, representing Agile TD, the conference, our values everywhere they go. And they also are doing this today, which is awesome. So thanks so much and welcome, you two.
Thank you.
Very professional. So yeah, this is actually pretty exciting as this webinar states the first of many to come, and not just online webinars and panels, but also our in-person meetups. As you might have seen, we have a few coming up the first half of the year, just to make the waiting until November a little bit less, and to meet and potentially hug people while we are at the meetup. And the first one is going to happen next week in Hamburg at the Moja offices in the middle of this beautiful town in the afternoon. And we hope you are able to join. And after that, we'll have a meetup in Cologne and in May. And in June, we're going to be in Munich. So stay tuned, and maybe we'll close to your town soon as well. And we would be happy if you could join us for any of these free community events. All right, so before we go on, a nice little introduction to this tool. You already are using the chat, which is awesome. Nevertheless, please abide to the code of conduct for online events, meaning don't say anything harmful, be nice to people, and if you are not, I'm going to kick you out without warning. And below the chat symbol on the right-hand side, you'll see the little question mark. And if you go in there, you'll find the Q&A panel. And if you have a question, just post it in there or upvote for a question that's already been asked. And in the end, I'll come back here and we will go through these questions one by one. You also have the option, if you want to share something with us, your own experiences, or you have a little question for the two here and you want to be on the stage with us, you're welcome to do so. Just wave your hand and we'll invite you here. It's not a must, it's just an option. Would be great to see you live anyway. So yeah, I think that's it for now. I'll see you in a couple of minutes and I'll leave it to Bart and Micha to start the presentation. And I wish you lots of fun and I'll see you in a bit.
Thanks, Ina. So I'm going to share the slides, actually.
In the meanwhile, I'm going to do a little song and dance. Oh, no, it's not needed. We already have the slides. Cool, Misha. Don't see any slides yet, but okay.
You don't?
No, I don't see, but welcome everybody to the Crowdcast. I'm Bart Knaack. I've already been at the Agile Testing Days for 9 or 10 times, something like that. Really enjoying it, and when they asked me to do this webinar today, I was really pleased to do so. Misha is doing this together with me, and I hope that we can get the slides in soon as well. So, CI/CD. Yes, there we are. Let's start off by introducing ourselves a bit more. Well, Misha, I think that the next slide is all about that, right? Oh, no, it's not. It's, are you ready for CI/CD? Yay! Cool. So, reading the audience is not really going to happen because we cannot see you. We actually just have, oh, this is the nice to meet you. Wow. There's a lot of information, Michael. Please go through it.
So yeah, hello everybody. I'm a software developer and software crafting enthusiast at REWE Digital. By the way, we will be hosting the meetup Ina just was talking about, and yeah, I like my flow to be continuous and my stress to be minimized, and hence I'm not just a software developer, but somebody who deeply cares about testing and QA and stuff like that. I'm also a passionate runner doing the Agile morning run, I think now 5th year in a row in Potsdam. I'm a French learner right now. Enchanté. I do enjoy craft beer, and I'm a vegetarian. Now, what about you, Bart?
Well, I don't have an impressive list like you have. Although I speak French already, zut alors. The most important thing to know about me is I love cycling, and I'm actually wearing my Alpe d'Huez t-shirt today because on the 6th of June, I'm going to be riding up and down Alpe d'Huez for 6 times. At least that's the intention. I'm training for 6. I'm hoping for 4, and I'll probably get stuck at 2, but that's fine. And other than that, I've been in the IT business for over 30 years now, and most of the time is spent as a tester or a test advisor. So, and currently, in my current assignment, I'm already working with CI/CD for about 4 to 5 years at the moment, starting at the point where nobody knew what CI/CD was, and now I think we're quite proficient. So let's dig in, Micha. Okay, let's first give a kind of definition of CI/CD, and actually it's 2 parts: the CI part and the CD part. The CI is continuous integration, where you try to merge your work with multiple people working on the same piece of software as often as possible to prevent nasty surprises after 6 weeks of hard labor, also known as merge hell. So you actually try to get a deployable piece of code, well, actually a piece of working code as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. And the next part, of course, then is the CDs, which can be either delivery or deployment. The difference is whether you automatically go to production or whether still a manual approval is needed to go to production. But you actually have a piece of software ready to be delivered to production at all times. So if someone says in 5 minutes you have to commit, we can deploy, we can commit, we can actually put something to production. And of course, the ultimate goal of CI/CD is to be able to push stuff to production 20 times a day. But, well, I think for a lot of people, that's far-fetched, because I see a lot of people and companies which are still struggling with having 2 releases a month, let alone 20 a day. But let's first start with some of the myths, Micha, that we have in CI/CD. So people think that once they have CI/CD, they have this skateboard, they can now go at the speed of light. And that by itself is well, that's the promise that CI/CD gives you, and at the same time, it's also the pitfall, because if people start with this in their mind as the expected outcome, they might be disappointed. It's hard work. You have the skateboard, but you still have to skate. You still have to learn how to fall and how to stand up and stuff like that. And it's not automatically that you have now installed your tools, everything is going at lightning speed. Well, it might, but then it will probably go at lightning speed in the wrong direction. So let's start off with some of the myths that we see, that people hear about in CI/CD, that are actually not true. And you wonder, yeah, okay, you're going to tell us about the myth, but what is this really all about? Well, Micha will tell you what it's all about and how it can help you after the myths. But let's first get you with your feet on the ground again, that the promise of lightning speed has some disadvantages. So the first myth is that people think that it's all about efficiency. So if you do CI/CD, that you get the most efficient process that you can get. And that's not true. Actually, Jez Humble, in his book, what was the book called again? Accelerate, says that a true CI/CD process probably is 25% less efficient than a good lean process. Because CI/CD is not just about efficiency, it's also about innovation speed. So how often and how quickly can you respond to innovations that you need to put into production? How quickly can you respond to your competitor that does something, and how easy is it for you to actually mimic that? So it's not just about efficiency.
Also, how quickly can you do an experiment on something? So it's not only about being quicker than your competitor, but also to be able to verify your assumptions on a regular basis.
And much quicker than you would normally. Yeah. Okay. The next myth that a lot of people think about is it's just about tools. So you install the Jenkins, or you install Azure DevOps, or you install whatever orchestration CI/CD tool that you can get, and that's it. And now you're doing CI/CD. That's the same as saying we're doing the Scrum events, therefore we are agile. It's not that you do these events that makes you agile. It's everything surrounding it that makes you agile. The same goes for CI/CD. If you only install the tools, it might help you. It might give you some speed, but it's not going to give you the full force of CI/CD. And of course, you need some of the tools. CI/CD without any tools is going to be quite hard, but it's not just about the tools. Next.
Pro tip, I once did CI without tools. That was really fun workshop, to be honest.
Oh yeah.
It's hard work, but you really get into this was what this was all about, right? So that was a fun exercise.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. So last myth before we go into the next part is, now we do CI/CD, we are completely DevOps. And actually, there's another myth about DevOps that says you put Dev and Ops in one team and now you have DevOps. Also not really true. Of course, you need to have a team that can do front to back complete software development lifecycle, including development and running it. But DevOps is more about also a high performance teams than just putting Dev and Ops in one room and saying, now we're DevOps. Same goes, if you do CI/CD, you're not automatically DevOps. You have additional steps to set. You have additional things to do before you actually become full-blown DevOps once you are already proficient in CI/CD. So those are the three myths that I want to already debunk before we do anything. And I think, Micha, now it's your turn to explain something more about what CI/CD can do for you, right?
Yeah. By the way, if you know more myths that you would like to be debunked, please put them in the chat. I'd love to extend this part.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is CI/CD or what it's not? So let me first of all show you the traditional sane way of doing software before we go into the crazy CI/CD world. So in the real world, you will probably sit down as a developer and you will start working on feature A. And your colleague will probably start working on feature B because, you know, all that pairing stuff, people working on the same thing at the same time, that's so inefficient, right? So, and then you will do some commits and everything works fine, right? It's so good because you don't need to talk to people. And that's fun, right? You only have your computer, you are in the zone, you're doing your coding. Right, but then that nasty Scrum Master made you do code reviews as if you didn't know what you're doing. So feature B now needs to wait for the code review, of course. But the person who's working on feature A, yeah, they are still really busy, so they can't do that right now. So that developer now starts to work on feature C, of course, because you can't wait forever, right? Okay, let's do some commits there. Oh, right, the code review came back. Okay. Actually okay, yeah, probably I forgot to put that comment and probably I should write that test and so on. So let's put in 2 more commits. In the meantime, feature C is just started, but probably won't be finished this sprint. Well, doesn't matter. Okay, let's do the merge. Fine. Feature A was really big. Oh god, a merge. But I did this big refactoring. Why did you work in these classes? I mean, you were working on feature B. Why did you even touch this code? Yeah, okay. Let's do this. Okay, let's put the whole thing in the pipeline. Let's build. Run those unit tests somebody made me write, deploy to some staging. All right, now the testers need to look into it. Yeah, that will take some time. They are working for that other team as well, so we are waiting now again. Oh, and maybe they might even find something, because testing is apparently something productive sometimes, and they actually find things that we in the zone didn't see coming. Then we deploy it eventually to production, probably next sprint only. And then, now we get feedback from users. And we made a pretty bunch of assumptions. So yeah, we need to do some hotfix branches as well. So in the end, we might end up with like 6 parallel branches, none of them short-living, and all of them potential merge hell conflicts. And so this is the way to develop professionally software.
Yeah. So put up your hand. Put a comment in the chat if you recognize this, because I think quite some people will recognize this way of working. I hope. Otherwise, we don't have to do this entire thing, Micha.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, we'll see in the chat if people raise their hands eventually. So this is the only way to develop software, according to a lot of people. And a lot of people don't even recognize that this is actually a very cognitively loaded thing. So you don't only have all these branches in your Git or Subversion system, but you also have to put your mind into different things, and you have this context switching between hotfixes, feature development, feature A, feature C, feature B, and so on. So you have so much started work, you have so much work in progress that you need to keep in your head, and this is a kind of inefficiency that you don't often see directly measurable in the code itself or in the version control systems, but it leads to some kind of stress that's actually unnecessary.
So how should we do it, Michael? How should we do it?
Well, there's this crazy idea called CI/CD, and there's another myth we should add, like continuous integration involves a lot of branching. It's not. Continuous integration is actually about not branch, because branching actually hides changes from one another. It isolates changes. It's not integration, it's continuous isolation. And this leads to missed opportunities to have discussions. And well, one maybe extreme way, but I found it really compelling, is trunk-based development. So trunk-based development means that most of the time, many people work on the exact same thing. So feature A, for example, and they will just work on the main line, on the trunk. And then whenever they push something to the main line, this again will trigger your continuous integration and continuous deployment pipeline. And it will again do some build, run some unit tests. But the promise now, or the idea now, would be each of these changes could go to production. So this should be automatically tested thoroughly. Not only those unit tests that you did because somebody told you that's the way, but maybe something more risk-based. Like you thought, okay, this could actually positively go wrong. This is a big risk that we carry for this change or for another change, or we might easily get a regression on this feature eventually when we add some new features. So you might need some more testing. And this is where the inefficiency comes in, maybe, because you run these tests every time something gets into the mainline. So this covers most known risks. Known risks. There might be other risks. Then you deploy to staging, and eventually you decide to deploy to production, usually. So this is the way me and my team are doing it. If there's no clear reason not to deploy to production, we deploy each commit to production. So we actually might do this without any manual testing at all, because we know this change, there's a low risk of breaking anything. It was just some icon in the front end was changed or something like that. Why would you do manual testing here? Okay.
And there's another reason as well, Michael, that if you can push stuff to production very quickly, if there's a bug in there, you can actually push a fix to the bugs to production very quickly as well. So rolling forward in if you have a bug actually is also one of the powers that you get by doing CI/CD.
Yeah, and we don't have this branch that never sees the light of production until it was merged, but we see feedback on single commits. So usually we have some monitoring on production as well, and we get some feedback from our users. And now if the users complain about something, we can immediately just add another commit that fixes that problem with it. So we get much more recent feedback, which is great because we are still in the context of making the mistake. The usual way with manual testing in between and then very postponed feedback from users is you started doing something else and you're far away from being in that context of making that mistake. So you don't need to rethink yourself into that context. So let's do feature B. Same story. Probably, by the way, this line of pearls here, each of them would have been going to the pipeline. But you can see feature B, the green feature, is much more commits to begin with. And so here we decided, okay, here we have a real risk of breaking something. So instead of just deploying to production, we are doing some exploratory testing. We as a team, the whole team is doing this. The testers, but also the developers are present. And so when you do exploratory testing with a development team, it's usually like, oh, that shouldn't work that way. Wait a minute, fixed it. Not, let me go to Jira, let's record a video so they actually believe that this bug exists, but rather like, okay, I just thought I know exactly the problem, I just will fix it. Give me 10 minutes, something like that. So it's
Micha, question, because if you're pushing all these pearls to production in your pipeline, then you're changing production constantly. So how do you make sure that that's not interfering with production?
I mean, you're doing really small changes, right? So most of those changes are, well, some of them aren't even recognizable, but and sometimes you develop a feature like you start with changing the database, then you do the intermediate glue code, and you save the visual change for last. So this is called branching by abstraction. So you make the feature, the change visible to the users. You postpone that as much as possible until and you do all the technical plumbing in the background first. So I'm not saying doing horizontal development, but rather like plan your deployment in that way. The other obvious and simple way is using feature toggles. So you say, we are hiding this from a certain group of people, so we make it only available to ourselves, to 1% of our user base, something like that. So you can do A/B testing with this as well. So you get really great feedback without even risking most of your users being introduced to an unfinished feature. There are different ways. You don't need to isolate the code. This was never what we wanted to do, but you isolate the feature, and the isolation of the feature can be done in production as well. And you don't need to hide the code from production.
Okay, cool.
Right. So, and then we start to work on feature C, and you can see how this goes. It goes pretty continuously. So you always do this. You always think about risks as a team, and you might do exploratory testing or not, depending on whatever you're doing. Right. So in the end, to sum this up, this is what you do. you don't branch, you just code, test, deploy, repeat all the time, continuously. One thing, though, that might not work really well with this approach is when you have a monolithic system that is not easy. So what we were just talking about, this feature branching or this feature toggling and branching by abstraction, this might not work really well in a very complex, very tangled system. So in order to be able to doing this, you might need to think about your architecture first, and not only about the way you're coding and you're deploying things.
But that's just not just the tools thing, right? It's not just installing the tools. It's also looking at the architecture, looking at the structure of your system, modularizing it when needed. Yeah.
So funny enough, REWE Digital basically went this way, and we only reached like more than one deployment in 2 weeks after we changed the architecture a lot. So it just wasn't possible with the original system. Today we are like, every team is deploying like 4 changes a day. And we could do 1 an hour, but that doesn't make sense. So
yeah, so how do we get that speed? Because what we said, you still want to be able to test a lot of stuff. And that, of course, is where you actually also need to think about your testing strategy, and maybe also do it possibly, not even possibly, essentially also doing a shift left in your testing. Right? If you have to do an end-to-end test at every release, that takes about 2 hours to run, and that 2 hours is actually a short time for an end-to-end test, a traditional end-to-end test, then you will just delay your entire pipeline by far too much. So you actually want to have a good strategy that actually says, these are the tests I really need to run, and try to run them as soon as possible. And Micha already said, someone told you to do unit testing. That's not just someone telling you to do unit testing. Unit testing might become an essential part of your work if you want to do CI/CD properly, because you want to get that feedback in unit testing actually before you deploy anything, before you commit anything. You also want to have the feedback that what you're doing doesn't break the system. And if we look at it from that point of view, in the ultimate shift left, you actually do a TDD, or a test first development style, where you actually write your tests before you start to write any code, making sure that you have this harness that if you deploy something, or if you commit something and it's already unit tested, that most of the things that could go wrong are already found in your unit test. And then you have to do an integration test, and possibly do it against mocks or stubs, that you can also do that locally, such that you can do part of that already before a commit as well. So once you commit, you're already quite sure that you have something that is actually worthwhile committing before. And then, of course, after you have committed it, it will be built and tested again. And then you might run some more integration tests, and in the end, possibly run a few end-to-end tests. But I've run into teams that were very proud to say that they have automated 10,000 end-to-end tests. And then I said, well, then you're doing it wrong. You possibly should have looked at your end-to-end testing, brought it down as much as possible, did the shift left, do it in unit testing, and then only automate 10 or 12 of your end-to-end tests in the end, that are really essential and that you really cannot test outside of the entire system, like data flow and stuff like that, to make sure that actually the system is working. So with CI/CD also comes the obligation, I would say, to actually do a proper shift left, and to really understand when you can do the tests as soon as possible, to get the feedback as early as possible as well. So that's a bit about more than just tools. You have to rethink your strategies on how to test and what to test. And if we go to the next slide, it's a mind shift left. That's a nice word game. Yes, but if you look at the testing pyramid, at the bottom layer, the next, if you press the button once more, you see unit testing, and that's actually the fundament of your entire pyramid. So if you do the unit testing properly, you actually, and that of course is, you also have to trust that you do not have to repeat all the things you've done in unit testing at higher levels again. because that's a mistake I see a lot of teams also doing, that they repeat all the tests at all the test levels again, just to make sure that it actually is working. You should have to trust that your unit test, for instance, takes care of all the boundary value analysis, that you do not have to do that anymore at the higher test level. It should take care of your input validations, such that you do not have to do those at the higher level anymore. So that's where you actually, and if you look at modularized systems, you probably need to do some context validation testing to actually also get some of those things already out at an early stage. Michael, I see that you want to say something.
How long would you say could a unit test suite run in a CI/CD pipeline?
Well, unit testing per se, almost by definition, is very quickly. So if you have a unit test that runs more than 1 minute, then you're already doing something wrong, I would say. But yeah, so the unit test runs actually, like I said, 1 or 2 seconds, that should be a nice time for unit testing. If it runs into 1 minute, you have to start thinking. If you do a unit test over more than 10 minutes, then you probably have something in there which is not unit testing anymore, but already integration testing or something like that. Yeah. So unit tests are by definition very quick, very smart, and actually run within seconds instead of minutes or hours.
I saw a lot of teams in the past that were optimizing more for a testing diamond rather than a pyramid. And the reasoning behind that was, and their test suites were terrible in runtime, but it was quite little code. So I think they subconsciously optimized for less testing code to maintain.
Yeah. Well, that of course is part of the mind shift as well. If you really want to get into CI/CD, then your team has to be a non-siloed team. So you actually, everybody in the team needs to have some development experience, I would say, and some might have more testing knowledge and therefore have a test spike or whatever, and know a bit more about testing. But yeah, unit tests, of course, are coded code that has to be written. On the other hand, unit tests are code that never goes to production. So if you have some accidental mistakes in your unit tests, some tests might have a false positive or a false negative, which of course is not good. But you never put any bad code into production if you have bad code in unit testing. I'm not saying that therefore your unit test code is not important, because you want to have it as maintainable as your normal code. But it's a good learning opportunity for people to actually, that are starting with coding, to actually get their hands dirty and to do some coding as well, without messing up production. So this actually is, if you look at the legitimate Slack reason, is if your code is unit testing, you don't have to do anything. It's being done automatically for 3 seconds. So for 3 seconds, you can do something else. So that's always good. Okay. Now, we also have I already hear people ask, okay, what about those non-functional requirements, right? Because if you actually want to do, you want to put something to production, you also want to make sure that the performance, for instance, is right, or that it has the proper amount of load testing done to it, such that you can actually see in soak testing that if you take it up for a longer time, it doesn't run out of memory due to memory leaks and stuff like that. How is that going to work in the CI/CD pipeline? Well, most likely it won't. You could do some shift left into these areas as well. By looking at performance trends of the different pieces of code, you can see, hey, most likely this is not going to be a problem because my unit tests are still as quick as they were before I made my change. And possibly you can say, well, let's do this in monitoring. So you have a proper monitoring that actually sees production going, performance going down if you put something to production. Or say, well, maybe you want to do an overnight performance test, and that is not part of your CI/CD pipeline. Is not the direct feedback that you get on the spot, but at least, well, if you do it overnight, then the next morning you will have some performance results, and that's in most cases early enough to actually be able to fix that. But you have to take care that if you want to do something like this and put stuff to production without having a performance test every time you put something to production, that it's safe to fail. that, right? If performance is already at the verge of being not acceptable, and then you start pushing stuff to production without doing performance tests, that might not be a good idea. But if your CPU usage is down to 10 or 20% anyway, then what can happen if you put something to production which is a bit slower, right? So make sure it's safe to fail, and also make sure that it's not your primary reason that you're actually putting into danger by putting into production. Did you hear? I used a French expression, raison d'être. Yeah, I know my French. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, Michael. Or do you have something to say about this?
I just wanted to point out, most of the time we don't really think about non-functional requirements anymore, because the changes that we do are so small, they hardly ever affect any of this. And I'm really, so in my career, several times people were asking me like, oh, shouldn't we do some performance testing? Shouldn't we do some usability testing, and so on and so forth? Well, first of all, UX is something that you don't need software for. You can test your UX before you even start to write code. So shift so far left, right? And in performance, I oftentimes been asked like, can we do a performance test on this? And then I crunched the numbers and told them, yeah, sure. We need a system that's roughly the same as production. Then we need 100 users simulating 1,000 users, and here's the bill, right? And nobody ever went for that bill. So either they were doing some crappy assumptional performance tests, put it that way, or they did what you just suggested, have some performance monitoring on the pieces, on the cogwheels, like how fast are the single parts. This is not essentially proving the non-functional requirement of performance, but anyway, it works. And the only thing that was really compelling to me is site reliability engineering approaches, like monitor the actual meaningful metrics in production, because there's no place like production. So your database won't be as full on staging as on production. So it's most of the time performance testing on staging is close to meaningless, and performance testing on production is so much better. Yes, you let your users do this, but well, at least it's true and not only imaginary numbers.
Yeah, and what you said about UX testing, by the way, you get the earlier feedback from your customers anyway by pushing stuff earlier to productions in the small changes, so they can react to those small changes. And your UX is kind of, well, if you use A/B testing, then your UX testing is actually part of that principle as well. People can say, hey, I'd like this better than that, and therefore you get your feedback.
Yeah, it's basically shift right? So just postpone it until you get actual data, and on the other hand, prove as much like your UX concept before you even start to code this shift left.
I always say shift left, look right. So you shift to the left and you look at the right and how it's going over there.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so once again, we go back to this automation part, because Micha has already touched upon this slightly, but this is actually where a lot of your effort will go in. If you really want to have a good automated test set, it should be reliable, it should be repeatable, it should be stable, it should actually prove something, and it also has to change possibly with every change that you make to the system. So the pipeline that you've built up with all the automation and everything in there also needs to be maintained as part of your releases and the features that you deploy. So that means that, and that's where part of the inefficiency also goes, that you're not only maintaining the system that you have, but also you're maintaining the pipeline with all the test automation and everything attached to it. And that also means that you might have to have some refactoring and some technical depth in your test automation to make that more reliable as well. So that's part of where the inefficiency goes, but it is an essential part. And I'm not sure how many people have really done test automation in a big way, but if you leave it unattended for 3 or 4 sprints, you already have created so much technical debt that it's almost impossible to fix. So please make sure that you keep automation in the loop and also into your sprints, and in every feature that you design, that automation and keeping up the automation is part of doing the work. It's part of your definition of done. I'm not done until my test automation is also updated and also kept into sync with my coding.
Yeah, by the way, test code is code. It's allowed to do refactorings on test code, and it needs refactorings eventually.
Yeah, and if you really are interested in the, for instance, in the quality of your unit tests, there are also ways of doing that, right? Mutation testing, stuff like that, actually gives you a quality stamp on your unit tests as well. So yes, it is normal code, and you should actually be treating it as normal code.
Yeah, I think Christian was here. We did a nice workshop last Agile Testing Days on code quality in testing code. There's a lot of stuff, and I just redid it as a talk in my company, and it's quite revealing how many people say, yeah, I see how that's wrong, but I do it all the time.
Yeah. So it actually means that for automated testing, you also need to do maintenance. If you have a maintenance, if you have an automated test set, you actually need to put in efforts to keep that up to par.
Yeah.
Just as a small side joke. Okay.
Right. So there are some pitfalls when you try. So now I guess everybody wants to do CI/CD right now, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can reject all this greatness. But there are some pitfalls to think about when you start doing this. The one thing is CI/CD, I think, was pretty much designed by teams for teams that have an agile mindset, or at least a lean mindset. So if you don't have trust in your development teams, you're not ready for CI/CD. If you have very fixed processes that were designed to make sure that something doesn't break, and they never worked anyway, but anyway you have these processes, and it's absolutely essential that you follow these processes no matter what value could be produced, otherwise you're not ready for CI/CD. If you need to document every single release, and that takes one person more than 1 minute a day, you're not ready for CI/CD. If you don't really want user feedback because users are always nagging about things you're pretty sure are awesome, you're not ready for CI/CD. Or no, actually you can do CI/CD, it's just not catering to your needs because you don't want to know, right? So CI/CD is very much about getting user feedback as accurately, recently, and fast as somehow possible. So if you're not interested in user feedback, don't do CI/CD ever.
Actually, if you get feedback, it's only worth something if you also do something with it, right? If you just get the feedback and then ignore it, don't ask for feedback.
That would have been my next point. If you don't want to change anything in your plans according to reality, it doesn't matter. You don't need that feedback, right? So don't do it. So this is maybe nobody noticed, but I basically translated the Agile Manifesto to this use case just now, and this is pretty much what you want to do. So you are interested. You want communication over processes. You want
working software.
You don't want to have excessive documentation, but you want working software. You value feedback much more than following the plan, and so on. So you can pretty much show it up, the Agile Manifesto for CI/CD. Right. Also, what a lot of people do, and we did it actually, is just pick something that looks easy and change that. well, that will probably not work that well. At least you won't see a return on invest quite soon. So you first of all need to think about your architecture, culture. The most obvious thing everybody I knew, at least, was always jumping on was automating as much tests as possible. That might be the most obvious thing that you need, but it's probably not the one that will give you the most bang for the buck, because you will just prolong your build.
Specifically, if you're going to automate all your end-to-end test cases, because they take so much time.
Yeah.
Actually, doing the shift left before you start to automate might be a better approach. Breaking down the monolith before you start doing CI/CD might be the better approach.
Yeah. So I try to think about something where you should start, but it's so much depending on on what you're doing exactly. I'm pretty sure I can find a good point. You could identify a good point to start. Basically, it's a classic bottleneck analysis. So where's your bottleneck? Try to fix that first, even if it's hard. This is the point where you lose time, where you, for example, that trunk-based thing. It might sound crazy for a lot of people. It sounds crazy still these days, but just try it. Just run experiments. So you don't need to start with throwing everything over and going for the craziness all in, but you can just identify experiments to do first, and try to get more people on this crazy idea of doing it CI/CD ways.
Yeah, and if you think trunk-based development is a step too far to do directly, then start to shorten your feature branches, make them short-lived. That's already your first step into the right direction. And one thing everybody can do wants to do CI/CD is to read the book Accelerate, because that actually gives a lot of insight in why you're doing it and what you want to do. And then you can probably, within your situation, see what would be your first big steps to actually take.
Or the Phoenix
Project. I don't have shares in the book Accelerate, by the way. I'm just saying that it's a good book and people should read it.
It's a great book. It's a bit complex. So if you're not that much into big books, I mean, you don't need to read the whole thing.
If you want to have an easier read, go for the Phoenix Project. It's an easier read and also has a lot of value in this.
Yeah. So I love the Phoenix Project. It was so easy to read, and it conveyed so much of the problem and the possible solution. I loved it. Right. So yeah, and also pretty much in the Agile slide already. So you need to think about, okay, we need to check if we are thinking the CI/CD way. So user feedback is essential to us. If you don't care about user feedback, if you don't want to trust your development teams, if you don't want to modularize your product, you're not in the right mindset for this. It will probably not work. I don't mean people are rejecting it because it's not the status quo. That's a different story. But sometimes you really have a mindset in your company that says, no, we don't need to know what the users think about this product. We have people for that who told us that it would be great, right? So in that case, your mind is just in the wrong place for this.
Okay, I guess that's the presentation that we wanted to give you. So now it's time for we've checked all the boxes. We've told you everything we need to say. So now it's time to answer some questions. So maybe unshare your screen, Micha.
Yeah,
Hi, Ina.
I did it.
Let me do it. Just let me do it. All right, I'm going to put you back in here as well, so you're not so small. So thank you. I think it was a really good choice to have the two of you there, because you could see opinions being shared and questions being asked between the two of you, which is awesome. And I really hope that everybody else who was here or is still here enjoyed the presentation as much as I did. And I actually have a few questions, not me, but our attendees. So I'm just going to jump into the tool and then let's see. So the first question, how do you deal with colleagues with that probably which that don't dare to commit because it is not ready yet? In brackets for days. Question.
Yeah. I know the feeling. Well, possibly, and that's and the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment. If you are not sure that you want to put everything to production straight away, then go for continuous delivery first, where you put it into a staging area and you can actually have a look at it before you put it to production. And that might help to already bring down their anxiety a bit. But next to that, I would say, why are they working by themselves? To see if you can do some pair programming, sit next to them, help them, coach them in what they should be doing.
Yeah. This would have been my go-to answer as well. Go for pair programming or even whole team programming to onboard these people. So I've been into teams. In fact, I've been that person myself, who's new to the team for a year. Like that's unacceptable, right? So this is just a waste of valuable workforce when you keep people guessing what's right. And I'm not saying document all the things like your coding style and everything. So sometimes people are anxious because they don't really understand what's the taste in coding of everybody. And sometimes they don't really have a shared and agreed upon taste. And that's the most terrible thing. So when you go into the code base and you can tell by the indentation who wrote that code, that's really bad. And sometimes people are just anxious because they are changing a lot of things and they really don't get how things are wired together. And in that case, just in any of these cases that I just described, go together, sit down together, work together, do strong style pairing. Let the unexperienced person have the keyboard. Let the more experienced person guide them through the code. Take your time to really understand. Ask all the stupid questions that you might have. Because in the end, you're doing your team a big favor with that by becoming extremely fast a more senior developer, and then you can work on your own pretty quickly. I know pair programming is not everybody's cup of tea, but
it does work. It does work. And one thing to add to that, not daring to commit because it's not ready yet for days. Try to get the changes as small as possible, right? So it's not writing this big change and then putting it to production. Chunk it down, make it small steps that you can actually put to production in a safe way, possibly by hiding it by abstraction by like Micha said before.
Branching by abstraction.
Or feature toggles, so that you actually do not really put this into production yet, but make sure that people understand that they really need to do small steps and deploy small steps, and then they also get some confidence, specifically if at some point something is also rejected because of test automation, so they can see that there is actually a check there which prevents them from doing really wrong stuff into production.
Yeah, and also go beyond testing in automation. So my team and I, we were start using automated code formatters, for example. So this can also reduce anxiety in new developers. They basically can't screw up. They cannot do it wrong because the automated code formatter we all agreed upon using will just fix their design flaws.
Yeah, static analysis, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
I hope this is answered, Pierre.
I think, and here's the next one from him. Talking about
right.
Where would you put your API and UI automation code?
And next to the code, in the same repository. Testing as code. Put them all in the same repository, because only then you get your really version control, your tight coupling between your test code and your other code. There's no other place to store it, in my opinion, than with the code. Add the code in the same repo.
Yeah, I would 100% agree on that. To be honest, I would put UI automation code as little as possible anywhere, because UI automation is. I might have a strong opinion here, but I think most of it is a waste of time. But
well, if you're using Selenium or Playwright, then actually your UI automation code is actual normal code, to put it like that, and can therefore be stored very easily inside the same repository as your normal code.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just saying UI testing is not testing the UI. It's just testing a structure that no human can sense. And I'm getting away from the topic here.
Yeah, let's all go into that.
The thing is with UI automation, though, just to make that last point, if you put it in your CI/CD pipeline, it will prolong the runtime quite a lot. So really be conscious about which additional risk is actually being covered here, and how much of that risk can actually be covered by lower level unit or integration tests.
Yeah.
Because UI automation is so costly in maintenance, but also in runtime, that it should be a big risk that can only be covered by this. So, and also think about UI testing not in the tip of the pyramid way, but rather think about it, okay, I take my front end in isolation and then run some Cypress tests on that. This might be way more efficient, and actually, if you're honest, it might cover even more risk than if you put it in the top of the pyramid, because you cannot test all the nitty-gritty edge cases there, because the runtime is too long again. So, yeah. But with the code, because when you change the code, you also need to change the tests. So you want to do that in one step. It's just wrong to have to do it in two different places.
Okay, there's actually a comment on that by somebody you probably know, Yogi Sievers.
Oh, okay.
He just put in the chat, Micha, if you use right UI test tools instead of SE, name, you might have a different view on UI tests in the CI/CD. And a little smiley.
Well, we are trying Playwright at this moment, which indeed is performing better than Selenium is. So in that sense, because actually Selenium uses a WebDriver to actually access the page objects and stuff like that, whereas Playwright more or less does it directly. So you do not have to have the WebDriver in between, which makes it faster and more reliable. But even then, like Micha said, it's taking time, and it's actually much more maintenance intensive than your unit test would be.
I just realize a bias towards this, because it's basically automating the manual testing. So it's pretty close to, right? You tell it doesn't really matter which tool you use. The general approach is, I tell in code what I would tell a human being to do with the software in order to check if it's working. And this is why this is so popular, because it's so close to human testing. But it is not human testing, because this code that you write doesn't have the sense of a human. It does not realize that this is working but clumsy, or not beautiful, or confusing. So all this feedback that you would get from a human testing person, you don't get from this UI automation code. This is what I say. So it might seem like you cover the same risk as when you do manual testing, but it's so far from the truth that you do. And this is why I think, on one hand, it's understandable that people go for this. On the other hand, it's actually not covering. It's not the optimal return on invest. Like the maintenance, as I said, UI tests, big maintenance, big runtime. If you have a risk fitting these numbers, fine, go for it. It's fine. I love it, to be honest. I think it's even fun to write those tests. But
and also remember that if for instance, like I said, if your goal is not to go to production multiple times a day, but your goal is, for instance, to go to production once a week. Let's set that as a goal for now. Then maybe doing some exploratory testing sessions in between on a staging area, where you actually get the true feedback of real humans, maybe not your end users, but of real humans, might be more worthwhile than having all these automated scripts, which, well, like Michael said, only give you part of the feedback that a human would give you.
Yeah. I'm not saying UI testing is evil, Yogi. You can keep going. Feed your sunk cost fallacy there. I get it. So it's not evil per se. I'm just saying maybe you're biased to go for the UI testing. Not you, Yogi, but everybody in the industry, basically.
Yeah.
All right. I think we could go on for a little bit. Oh, Yogi said something again.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we need to stop just to be time sensitive for everybody. It's now exactly 1 hour that we started. One last thing though, as you can see, we could go on forever, and we will, not now, but in November during the Agile Testing Days. And Bart and Michael actually agreed to one or are the two track chairs for our newly installed deep dive track for CI/CD. We'll have actually 4 topics, and one is CI/CD. And can you maybe quickly explain what that actually means to have a deep dive track? What does that entail?
Yeah, sure. The deep dive actually means that we're going to have 4 elements, all focusing on CI/CD. So there's going to be an introductory talk, which is going to be, well, not a redo of what we just did right now, but will closely resemble that, explaining people what CI/CD is and how to use it. Then we're going to have a deep dive track. We haven't decided on the specific topic for the deep dive yet, but that will actually take you into CI/CD a bit more, look at some aspects in more detail. Then we'll have a workshop together with Emily Beach, as she called herself. Yeah, that's interesting for me. I wouldn't expect that pronunciation, but together with Emily, we're going to do a workshop on CI/CD at a conceptual level to see how it works. We're also thinking of setting up something for the open space so people can actually get their hands dirty on doing some real pipeline coding stuff to actually get to get their hands dirty. And we'll have a panel discussion to close it off. So what we hope for is that people, after doing that track, that sessions, actually get a more understanding of CI/CD than just going to a presentation and hearing about CI/CD for 45 minutes without actually doing it. Because I think a big part of CI/CD is actually you should touch it, you should feel it, you should feel the impact to actually really grasp the details. And we're looking forward to doing that in November. So we are already well on the way with preparations for that. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it as well. And in case, Michael, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to invite all the CI/CD skeptics. We'd love to have you there, especially for the panel. We like to. I wouldn't say to. I mean, I did a quite sarcastic. I put out my sarcasm in between, but CI/CD is not for every product, not for every company, not for every organization, and that's fine. And I want to meet rejection of ideas with curiosity instead of sarcasm. But, yeah.
It's not a one size fits all. It's not like everybody will improve if they use CI/CD. So you have to, and that's something that we hope to convey as well during this deep dive. When is CI/CD applicable? What should be the context, and what goals do you want to achieve to actually have the full benefits of CI/CD?
Thank you. Well said. And with that, we're closing our first webinar. Stay tuned for more. And if you're close to Hamburg, come to our free meetup next week on Wednesday. And if not, we'll see you here.
I want to do the Cologne one.
You want to do the Cologne one?
I want to be there. I'm not going to do it. I want to be there. Let's
okay, yeah, great. You're close, right? You're going to come with a bicycle. So that's fine. So yeah, maybe we'll see you in Cologne. So these two will be there too. So
it's only 200 kilometers, Bart. You did it before. I know that.
Yeah.
All right.